Hello, I'm Christian Roberts. I'm here with my fabulous friend and co-host,
Quodicia Johnson.
and we are back with yet another episode of Taking the Stage with Christian.
And Quo. And of course, as we begin all of our episodes, because we are committed to truth, we begin with a land and people acknowledgement. We want to take the time to acknowledge that we in Dallas are on stolen land. We are on the land of the Caddo, the Wichita, and the Comanche sovereign nations, of human beings who lived the full human experience and who cultivated the land since time immemorial. Human beings who also faced genocide and policy that allowed for forceful removal by any means necessary. We also want to acknowledge that people were stolen from their homes off the coast of Africa and brought to this land and forced into free and enslaved labor. From that enslaved labor, from the stolen land, from stolen lives, we have what we now enjoy as Dallas. We do this never to cast blame. None of us created these conditions, but we have inherited these conditions, along with the responsibility, the honor, and the community necessary in order for us to reduce the harm, to speak the truth, to connect through truth, and to create a better world going forward. We thank you for joining us for this land and people acknowledgement.
And we also thank you for joining us today for this episode. We have two very special guests again with us today. We are doing a follow-up with the Larneys. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so glad to have you with us again. And so today we wanted to follow up on American Indian Heritage Day in Texas. You have been at this for 10 years now.
Woo!
Yeah, but that deserves all the snaps. And you have had powwows, you have had several events that have happened in the past month. And of course, we know that we had a day yesterday that is, I'm going to be polite, that is challenging for this country to let go, simply because we know that there are historical things that happened in our country's past that we must acknowledge, and that's part of why we also do. Go ahead.
Yesterday was Columbus Day, but we don't acknowledge Columbus Day.
That's where I'm. That's where I'm headed.
Polite.
No, that's where I'm headed. I was trying to say that nicely. Let's just leave this in.
Yeah, no.
The bottom line is it was colonizers' day. Okay.
Yes.
And so I want to make sure that we honor the actual change that is taking place across the country as more people are realizing that that is nothing to celebrate. But what we must do is uplift our indigenous and our American Indian communities.
Yes.
So yes, okay. So quote brought me out of my politeness. I'm not going to be polite. It's wrong. Wrong is wrong.
You can be kind, right? We can center truth, but sometimes the niceties, it's like, yeah.
No. Let's get to the nitty-gritty. Okay, the man was horrible. Did horrible things. All right. So but it is very we are living in a time where things are changing, where more truth is bubbling up to the surface, and that has been your work for the past 10 years prior to that, but actually being incorporated as an organization. So tell me how that has been going for you and how you feel about just even the past month of events that you have been working so hard, and that culmination of all of that work. Either one of you can answer.
Brian's the one that's really been working hard at it, so I'll let him go first.
Right.
I think the hardest part is that if we're not doing it, no one else will do it. And I think the other part is that if we're doing the example, someone's always watching us, good or bad. And if we are going to spend the time, we might as well do it the right way. I think the other part is that people are watching, but they're watching us of where we were at the City of Dallas Plaza, and they know that we were there because of equity and equality. And it was for me, I told people, I said, it was a powwow that we had on the 24th and 25th, but for me, this is a power move.
Yeah.
And the only way that we're going to strengthen and have more visibility, to have more of a better conversation with the City of Dallas, I said, and even globally, I said, you have to start somewhere. And the hardest part is that we've only started talks of welcoming, and we've only started conversations, meetings, let's try this. And out of how many years that American Indians were here versus the other long side is that American Indians have been original habitants for you to develop a land acknowledgement and never had that conversation till just lately. I think that's the civil rights that I tell them that we have to push. It may sound weak or it may sound ambiguous, but I think those are the parts where if I don't throw a rock, you're not going to feel it. And I think that's the part where, you know, I think for the training, friends, alliances, support, I think that's what gives us an anchor to make sure that we don't float away. But the other part is that when you start making a movement like this, you move it out of confidence because you get other people assisting you. But at the same time is that we try to look at ourselves as a standard because we created the American Indian Heritage Day law, which is a law in the state of Texas. But even then, if we're looking at ourselves as the standard, then we have to make sure that no one catches us because we have to be forward thinking and provide a whole lot more where we become we become and looked as a standard in a different way that we evolve. And I think evolution is where you come from cultural wealth. And even then, when we've had all of our events, it's always, we call it sacred heirlooms. Sacred heirlooms may be a song, maybe a story, maybe the passing on of acknowledgement or historical ties. But even then, it comes from our voices that's been never heard because it's been we haven't been always been unaccommodated and not welcomed. And I think those are the parts where, how come you haven't spoke? How come we never met you? Is it, well, you have to look at the beginning.
Right.
We were removed in order for doctrine of discovery and manifest destiny. So with that part is that what makes you think that we can have a story that's not depicted, kind of translated, spoken for. And the other part is that when you move forward, someone's always going to try to catch that narrative because we're imposing on their space and their time.
Yeah.
I think those are the parts where, all of our 547 tribes and nations has to come together. But also that we also make sure that because of intermarriages we grow beyond 547 also. And I think with the integration of other ethnicities, I think it becomes very cultural and very educational, and it's a tool that we do. But what is hard work when you see existence of growth happening and you see people gathering the way it's supposed to be in a place they never thought they'd be at a location they never thought could be attainable. But everything happens for a reason. But at the same time is that that's our equity of what we're trying to do with the organization. And I think those are the keys. But I think those are the parts of that we're doing baby steps, not as what we're doing the last 10 years, but evolving into new markets, new arenas, new conversations that I never thought we'd mix. And I don't want to be tiptoeing into that room. I want to break down the door, and I think those are the parts where we start looking through that narrative, and I think that's where we start challenging. We start bringing up other information. But if they're going to ask us questions, I'm going to answer. But I'm going to give you 3 more questions also, because if you don't think that we're just one-way street, that I'm going to challenge you also. But even if I ask you, even if I ask that other question back, I'm going to challenge your ethnicity your historical value and your relationship with your grandparents and ancestors and DNA. And, if you have a right to ask me a question, I have every right to ask you a question back, because that's the way we get cultured. But I think that's the platforms we're trying to introduce, where it's just, it is our world interpreted, but at the same time, we're trying to learn also through a different perspective. And how do we start challenge ourselves to start gaining more from our historical value from our ancestors? And I think those are the parts that we look at on how to evolve together, not just singular.
Mm.
When we first started the organization 10 years ago, it was my husband and I, and we were just accepting the challenge. The challenge was, after I had put a posting on Columbus Day that it was not fair for a holiday to be observed by observing a invader of our country when this country is already occupied by people, and that children shouldn't really have to learn that. And I was challenged to, well, why don't we do a state law? And that was a little above my comfort zone. I've been doing a lot of activities, but it's just been lower than that. And so my husband and I talked about it that night, and we came back with the lady, and she was from the Southwest Jewish Congress. And we told her, well, we'll accept your challenge, but you're going to have to help us, because we had no idea what to do. But basically, she didn't either. But I was able to get a core of younger generation, Brian's generation, to be the driving force behind this, because I wanted it to be by the Indians for the Indians. They developed the writing words for the draft HB 174, the law. And in the meantime, I had found a state representative, Roberto Alonso, who was willing to have his office. He offered, so I took it immediately. He said, anything we can do to help you? And I said, well, I understand, I need to have somebody from Austin to introduce this. And he said, we'll do it. And so he did. And my husband got to see it in October, not see it, but hear it. In October, we were in Austin for a conference that I was participating in. And the legislative aide to Roberto Alonso's office came by and told us that they had already signed up early. They were like maybe number 7 on the agenda of topics for the upcoming state legislation, what would be started in January. And so Larry got to see that, but he passed away in December. And Brian immediately stepped in, and we were wanting to see the actual writing or passing of the law by the governor. But we didn't get to see that. We got a telephone call and said that it had been passed. So that's how we really started. We were quite prepared for it, but we immediately said, well, we've got to have something in September, since that was the day, last Friday in September. And then luckily, things have been very luckily given or falls in our lap. Lone Star Park was a place that said the Chickasaw Nation that we could have that with, and they would support us. And so they've basically underwritten everything there and has made it very easy for us. And every year we've challenging ourselves, what are we going to do this year? And coming up with what is current in Indian country, what urban Indian needs to know. And we go from there and sharing other cultural. So we try to have maybe some guest speakers that comes in that from different tribes, but it's Indian trying to teach Indian, especially in urban area, who have kind of lost their disconnect from their tribal people and need to know. If they're not interested, we're going to still say, well, we did it. You should have been here. It's an educational forum.
Yeah.
And then as we went, we've had developed a lot of following. So we're very fortunate in that. But Brian was the one that came in. I'm from the old school. I don't talk the language that the younger generation does. And I've been in school system so long that it's kind of regulated for me that I can do all of this, but I can't. I didn't have the freedom to be so open too. Whereas Brian, of the younger generation, you heard him talk. I couldn't talk like he does. But he articulates very well what everybody, today's people, understand and need to hear from a well-educated Indian.
Mm.
Hardly none of our Indians can speak at the level that Brian just spoke a few minutes ago. Hardly nobody in our Indian community has even made a dent into the city of Dallas, and Brian has.
Mhm.
And so that's how we were very fortunate to have the powwow in front of the City Hall Plaza. But also they realized that that Brian's got an organization behind him has made a
Mhm.
lot of differences. And so we're we're continuing to support Brian, and he's out there and he's basically given up his career and is into this full time because it's something he really believes in. And well, I'm here to support him, and the rest of y'all are here to support him. And it makes a lot of difference. I appreciate that, and thank you very much.
Of course. Spoken like a true mom.
Yep.
Nice.
100%. 100%. I love the fact that um that you said because one of the things we talk about is intergenerational conversation. And I think it is one of the most vital things, if not the most vital thing. I mean, you have to know your history. And one of the things I always encourage is people to sit down with the elders in their life and just listen. You don't need to judge anything. You
Right.
don't need to try to fit. You need to hear what came before you. And I love the fact that you said that you and your husband started it. You said we never done anything like this before, but let's go. And there were people who worked in community with you, but not only that, when your husband when your husband passed away, your son steps into place. And I think that's vital right now because what would have happened if he hadn't been paying attention to what you all were doing? You know what I mean? What would happen if he did? He was like, okay, that's just mom and dad's thing. And to me, it's a beautiful thing that someone would respect and want to honor who they are and where they come from so much, and they want to make sure that somebody else knows who they are and where they come from. So I have to give a shout out to you all for that because um, I have a feeling that more folks in the American Indian community know who they are and know where they come from because of the work you all have done. And not only do they know, more and more people in this city and in this nation are coming to know that as well because of the work that you all have been doing. So I have to I have to commend you for that myself because it's one of the big things that I like to see when you can pass something down generationally and they take it. And the one thing that I always love, there's a combination of the wisdom that you get from your elders and the fire and youth that you get from the generation that comes. And when you blend those things together, you might not be able to get out on the ground and do the heavy footwork, but you have the wisdom, the knowledge, and the know-how to guide those people who are able to get out on the ground and do the work. And so I really appreciate you talking about that. That is one of it is quite literally one of my favorite things. And I think if we had more of that in our society of just listening and learning intergenerationally and open dialogue on both ends, I think we could make a lot of great changes. So that's my soapbox, y'all. I will stand on that, but I do think that intergenerational connection is huge in your efforts. So I have to also give you a shout out, Brian. The fact that you were like, this is important to me. And that the last show that we did with you all, Brian talked about thinking about 7 generations after him. So I can tell that those seeds that were planted in you by your parents are now being passed on to the folks coming behind us, honestly.
Behind us, yeah.
So that's all I have to say. Quo, you go ahead.
Yeah, and I appreciate that too as well, Kristian, because you said that you have a feeling that more American Indian people, more Native American people, are kind of more aware of who they are, and I will also say that so do I. So do so many other people in not just engaging with American Indian Heritage Day, but engaging with anyone who is committed to this is what came before me. These are my cultural heirlooms. These are the things that matter to me. You have in a space of connection as human beings, you almost do yourself and others a disservice not to learn. You do yourself a disservice, you do others a disservice you kind of lose out on the ability to connect when you don't learn and you don't start to wonder, if you don't already know, right? If you don't start to wonder, why is that so important to them? Well, what does that mean for me? Can that be important for me? And so I always appreciate, Brian, that you say, I'm going to challenge. And a lot of times we have a fear of open conflict. We're like, this is about to get weird. No, it's, I'm going to ask you a question, and knowing that that question is a journey, knowing that that question is a lifelong journey. I'm going to ask you a question. You came to me, you coming to me, asking me questions about all these things, but do you have an answer for the questions yourself? So I think it's beautiful. And we always tie it back to what organizations can do and to learn. We have so many organizations who go into communities, who want to partner with communities, all these words about equity and belonging and IDEA, all these things, and justice and Jedi. We have all these terms that ultimately lead to a space of connection, that lead to a space of co-creation, that lead to a space of accountability and what it means for us to move as a community. It leads to community. And the question of, when you ask me, who are my people, pretty much, where am I from? What do I do with my culture? Can you answer the same? And have you been asking yourself the same? So I always appreciate that clarity as well. So yeah, that's
especially in a especially in a time where history is blatantly being erased and being banned and such. So I think it's even more important that we are listening to each other and learning about ourselves and sharing that information with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, just thinking about it, it is really kind of scary, but this is something that must be done. And I think it's going to have to happen with us talking to each other, and learning about ourselves and talking to each other instead of depending on some outside entity to tell us what our history is, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah,
and I'll just leave it at that.
But we're in systems where the history has been contorted and twisted, right? We just talked about how yesterday is known as Columbus Day, and the narrative of I discovered this place, the narrative of manifest destiny, and the narrative of all these things happening because the full truth is not being told.
Yeah, well, it's flat out a lie. You literally made up myth and propaganda, and people run with it and then get upset. And that's the reason why I said in the beginning, before Cole said stop being polite, but why we said in the beginning that it is challenging for some people to let that go because they've been fed that day their entire life. The 1492, Sail the Ocean Blue, they've been fed that their entire life, and it is an absolute the whole story. You didn't discover anything; people are already there.
Right.
They discovered you lost at sea, but then you know what I mean? You were lost. You were not even in the right place.
In the right
place. So
and
and then you went and name people how you want them. You stole their land. So that's my whole point, is that kind of narrative and myth that has been twisted. And it is flat out myth. It is flat out propaganda. It's hard for some people to let that go, and it's like, but it's wrong.
And I think
so it also tells me there's a deeper need for people who get angry about saying we need to let that type of thing go, to really take a look and search at their history.
Right. Yeah.
And see why you should be letting that go.
Right.
So I'll just leave it at that. But you know where I'm headed this. You have to really look at your history and not what the history books told you and the partial truths.
Yeah.
And the picking of what people they want people to know. And so I that's what I appreciate. And Brian, you're right when you said if nobody else does it, if we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. And a lot of times the onus falls on an individual starting to look within themselves and then working in community from there. So I went on another soapbox. I didn't mean to. We have more questions. We have more questions.
I was going to jump in real quick. I think the hardest part is that there is no celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day. How do you celebrate genocide? And the other part is that they ask, I've been on interviews, so they ask, what is Indigenous Peoples Day to you? And I said, it's about honor, respect, and, of Indigenous Peoples Day. And Indigenous Peoples Day is countries, not just right here of marketing. And that's the hardest part, is that people only are have their blinders on to what is told through a pattern of history of lies. And so a lot of people don't understand that, yes, American Indians are involved in this. I said, but I go, why do you think the statues are all being torn down? But at the same time is that no one gives us, gives our homage, and, and we don't pay tribute to those that down south of 1492 that were from the Arawaks, Tainos, Haitians, and the Caribbean, that those are where genocide happened. And people in history don't talk like that. And I know in school, in our history, I'm sure it's not being told, because also that there's laws now to detract historical value from the youth. And so what is the youth going to grow up knowing, except when they watch all the social platforms and learn about the truth? But but those are different narratives of how evolution, grows out of what is tone deaf. And I think that's how we grow. But I think the hardest part is that they're surprised when we chat, when we talk, because I still think that Italian Americans still need to have their day, but it shouldn't be under the same lineage of an individual that's aligned with Hitler. That what are you celebrating the day on an individual, in an individual, or are you celebrating ethnicity? I think that's what should be really separated in that conversation. But when I say it, I said, I'm going after Columbus. I'm going after the people who did the genocide. But I'm not trying to be the people that oppressed me. I'm not trying to exterminate the Italian Americans' voice either. And and I think those are parts where perception gets misconceived, because they think that we're trying to overrun with our mentality to erase everything like we've been erased, and then just say, well, it's ours, and jump up and down. That's not what we're after. We're trying to correct history when people don't want us to correct history. But at the same time is that when you look at what we do is honor and out of respect, but even then, who do you respect? And that's where the conversation has to really dive deeper. And even today, we were still saying, Indigenous Peoples Day, we honor and respect all the Uvalde children and that were minorities. And I think those are the other parts that doesn't have to be 500 years ago. It could be 3 months ago. And I think that's where historical value gets really put out of context, because we're thrown into a person's mindset where it has to be a black and white picture instead of what's you see in front of you. And the process of rules, regulations, and policies of a pattern, what was through the genocide, is still being perpetuated through our systems of today. And I think that's why a lot of innocent killings do happen under that genocidal perspective, or that landmark, of where go, things ain't stopped. But I think that unity has to happen a little bit more for us to integrate a whole lot more. But it's not a part where we celebrate. We're not going to have a party. We're not going to jump down. And I think the other part is it's more of a gathering. It's more of a social environment where we give thank you to our ancestors and those who are survived also. But it's also cultural, and been passed on from generation to generation. And those are the keys where even with the opera, the scene is that you're still carrying the old songs, you're still carrying the dialects, you're still carrying on the regalia, the background, you're still carrying on the mannerism, the etiquette, and I think those are the parts across the board, whatever you think opera is and what language. I think that has to be deciphered, but I think that authenticity is what happens so much more in that strength, where you strive to be more, but when you're completed, guess what? You have to learn another language and go to another dialogue. and start learning a different other new set of interpretation. And that's because you're so well versed. But I think that's where we're at. And the part where we look at how we interpret, people ask us, well, is it one dialect? No, it's multiple dialects. Is it one culture? So no, multiple cultures. And people are jumping in because they don't have any friends that are American Indians. And so I think that's what we're trying to bridge the gap also by having different other events like we've been doing. But I think that like everybody else does, that we have to be American Indians all the time. But it's not hard when that we've been water protectors and land protectors before any ships popped up. And and I think that that's the truth, because as cultivators that we knew how to live off this land, and everybody that did migrate, the right people knew how to migrate, how to live off this land also, because they're parallel with our same culture and teachings. And I think those are the parts where we can show a collective thought of sharedness, and then also making sure that we're parallel more than you think, even though someone's trying to divide, that it's not that hard. And I think common sense prevails over what perception is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's all I have. I don't need to, we can wrap up there, because that literally covered like the next two questions. It really did. What sticks out to me there is when you say, basically, we're parallel. Once we start to talking and get to knowing each other and integrating around each other, we start to realize we start to celebrate our differences, right? And also be happy about the commonality that's there as well, right? The things we have in common as well. And I would love to see where and something else that you said about, we're not trying to take anything away from Italian Americans. What we're saying is we can find another way to celebrate. It doesn't have to be this man, and the thing is, if you can there's other ways to honor and celebrate. You can still talk about what happened, right? You can still talk about the fact he got here, he got all of these things, but you need to tell the scope of what happened. Just tell the whole scope of what happened.
And I say so often because we lean so much into perfectionism, where we kind of not just glorify, but create these myths about people, as opposed to allowing people to be human beings and telling the entire truth. Yes, this and this. We're not unfamiliar with that in opera. We're having conversations all the time about works, all the time about composers that we still doing their work, right? Shows and operas and productions and stories that have been traumatic for performers and audiences alike, still trying to make it okay. And so it's in this space of, as we start to, before we can have a meaningful, not just conversation about finding meaningful solutions, starting with truth. So much of this is starting with truth. And Kristian, you say this often, two things can be true at once. Many things can be true at once. Yes, this land, right, is stolen. Yes, we are all here. How do we continue to not dismiss the things that have happened? How do we continue to center and to tell the truth about not just, I don't want to turn this into the Columbus Day episode, but not just about the lies, not just about the genocide, not just about the stolen land, the stolen people. How do we make sure that we are speaking truth to that we are not brushing it under a rug, and we're not dismissing it because it makes us uncomfortable, right? Or because it's too different that we don't want to talk about it. How are we actively honoring truth while also simultaneously creating a world together? That doesn't mean we don't talk about it, but that definitely means we continue to disrupt anything that tries to silence it. That's my soapbox. Like,
just tell the truth. And the thing is that nobody is judging you in present day based on what happened before. What we are looking at, though, is what's going to come next.
And what are you going to do?
What we're going to do here and now. what we do here now and what's coming next. Are we going to continue the nonsense, or a 21st century version of that nonsense that happened back then? Or are we really going to look at that nonsense and say, we're not doing that again? That's the difference, right?
Yep.
But you have to be willing to, Brian, I go back to your point. You have to be willing to look at your own history and answer your own questions about your own stuff. And in order to be able to do that, you have to know it. And you cannot depend on what is in the textbooks. You know, just solely of what was in the textbooks. Even if they were to cram, even if it was possible to cram in everything, you know, you'd be in school for 7,000 years. So you got to go hit the library, you know,
and talk to
you know what I mean, or
right?
read some books, you know, and that's the thing. And the only thing that I will say on this too, because in thinking about this, and what organizations and communities can do, not only in what can they commit to, not only in this work, but how this work goes throughout their organization, how it goes into the community. What would you like to see our organizations and our communities do, and what would you like to see them commit to? Either one of you can.
Your organization, would it be possible to have maybe American Indian Night, to where it would be the community, the Indian community? I'm sure there's quite a few adults and parents that's never really been to an opera. That would be a good introduction to them, maybe, and then maybe they could bring their children and their grandchildren with them. Is it possible to have American Indian Night?
That's beautiful. And because
it is a beautiful idea, and it's certainly something. Now that's something that we certainly could put forth, and we could put that forth really to any organization. You know, if you're having events and you are trying to reach out to new communities, you heard what Elder Peggy just said.
And then I'll also say the nuances of inviting people for a night, and not and navigating the space where you're inviting people into a space that may or may not be new, and making sure not just people are comfortable and that they feel welcome, but they are active participants, as opposed to you come here, you stay over here, let me ask you 5 million questions about all your things, so look at what we've done, as opposed to welcome, let's do this together. So that's also right, because that is the way that we would approach it. That is the way that we're going to approach what that looks like, so that it's meaningful.
And I don't want it to turn into a you know, to a fishbowl sort of activity where people walk about looking, but also we want to make sure that what happens after.
Right.
Are you just holding something because you want to say, hey, look, we reached a new community, and never talk to people again?
Right.
Or is this going to be a continuous thing? So absolutely, I think that is something that should be in consideration. And I would say that for any organization, and the first thing I would do is work alongside an organization like yours. You know, I know here in Dallas, that's definitely what we would do, work alongside yours to figure out the best way to do that. Because what I also don't want to do is patronize anybody.
Right.
So and so other organizations who are watching this, you know, leaders, please understand, you heard what she just said, and make sure that when and if you do decide to do something like this, that you work alongside an organization like American Indian Heritage Day in Texas. Don't go assuming anything. And I say that to myself first and foremost, you know, because that to me is a true definition of wanting to do community engagement, and work community engagement, and, you know, audience cultivation and all that starts tying together. So you have to make sure you're working together in a partnership, but not only in a partnership, in a way that is guided by those who you are trying to reach.
Nice.
I think the other part is that if you're going to collide opera with American Indian culture, that when you learn these songs, that you sometimes forget that these songs been, you know, if you're singing Italian, that how long has that Italian been through so many actors and actresses, how many stages, how many countries and cities and how long. And, that's where your audience, oh, it's hard to hear, but that's something that we have to learn on our side to integrate more. But these songs are oral stories also. And I think
Mm-hmm.
parts where, um, if you don't understand our culture, then understand the songs that you sing from your platform, transition over here. It's the same way we do because these songs are old. And I think that's the best way if you don't feel like you don't know how to connect. Parallels are so quick, you just have to look at it through a different mindset, and it becomes a little more, transparent, but there's a lot of clarity in that, oh yeah, I do this in my practice. Well, it's not far from what we do all the time. I didn't know these
Mm-hmm.
songs happen all this time. Well, if you practice and you sing it and you get permission and you know how to sing it from way back in the day, and and if you know where the original songs from the operatic experience comes from, or what countries they were singing it back then. And we've had our
Mm-hmm.
talk where it came from the poverty levels that got sprouted up by the rich and became this powerhouse. But it didn't start. It didn't start with the elite. It started amongst the people. And I
Mm-hmm.
think those are just keys why something of this importance has been transitioned through generations, through different ethnicities. But I think that each person has that responsibility to make sure that it goes to another generation, or they see the youth singing and they want to be a singer like that, like the individual that's performing. But I think the hardest part is that what we try to do is to do actions. And I think with everybody here that are the people that stands on the stage is that you're the ones doing the action. It's time to get the individuals out of the seats, out of their chairs, and get on the
Mm-hmm.
stage and start being the action people also, because
Mm-hmm.
you can't watch and sit all the time. And I think those are the parts where y'all do a great part of giving the experience out. But at the same time is that when do the others get off their seat and start participating a little bit more? And I think all that sometimes they just need an invite, or just they want their hidden person that wants to do this passionately. But at the same time is that when does another group or audience start participating in the cultural perspective for anybody beyond American Indians? But when you start looking at integration, because going back to Columbus Day, our Heritage Day, which is the law, our celebration, even through some of the projects we call Seeing Red that tackles American Indian issues, that immigrants aren't just brown to us. Everybody's an
Mm-hmm.
immigrant.
Talk about it.
And I think those are the hardest parts where you decide to block off another person's culture and their language only because you're taught how to look at it of dominance and privilege. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the other part is that through the operatic stage, you've had to learn diversity and learn that you only exist through learning someone else's dialect and someone else's experience. And I think that's where cultivation happens. But at the same time, is that what is the difference between opera and real life? I don't think it's nothing. And I think that's where the integrations could be a whole lot easier. They even invite more and more of the operatic, you know, audience, and also the talent, that this is a craft that's not hard to understand when you walk into our world. And I think those are the parts where we need to make sure that we have an invite for everybody too. And it's that there could be a way if we can do different projects of mixtures of more of a United Nations transition. But I think those are the parts how you look at it, because I'm sure that how long y'all been doing all these episodes, that some people still don't get it. And I think that even at this stage right here, people may think, well, what are you going to do more? Well, this is the part where you do more now. And I think those are just the simplistic overtones of an individual not being sometimes I got to quit holding your hand and you got to start coming along by yourself. But I think that's the power that we can give. But at the same time is that this is a tool that we're trying to push to give different other nationalities and also the other American Indian entities a more of a resource in how they can educate and have more culture and expand outward also. So it's not just something that we hold into. This is ours. See y'all later. I think this is the part where we've been taught, not through a tourism perspective, but and not through cultural tourism, but through cultural preservation. And I think that's the deciding factor because a lot of people will take this out of context and throw it into the Hollywood lens and say, "Oh, y'all do this and this and this. Where's your teepee?" It's like, sorry, we don't have one. And but I think those are the parts where, if you look at through the narrative of what we do with our culture and also the opera, that we always talk, converse, sing over food. And I think that's the common denominator, but it's always a gathering. And I think those are just the needs on, you know, I know we're supposed to be talking about American Indian culture all day, but I think the need is that how do we start interacting and building an invite for operatic craftsmen to start coming over and doing, do better collaboration, but how can we do more to infuse a lot more American Indians into the system also under the right tutelage? And to me, I think that this is all civil rights. And, I think that that's the part where if you go to logistics and analytics, you'll see what I'm saying. But at the same time is that if you do one by one, I think it makes headwinds of a difference. But I think those are the parts where you have to look at where do you want to do more and how do you want to help? Because we're the same way. I don't look at skin tones or blood quantum. I think that for us that it's always a shared concept, but at the same time is that I don't see you. I see your grandparents and I see your ancestors. I see that black hole in your heart that if we can help mend and heal through medicine, I think that's where you walk a little bit stronger. And I think that's where you carry a more emphasis of who you are from your grandparents' perspective, not from what you were taught through marketing.
Well, that's the way. Well, it was just what we were saying earlier. I mean, you got to do that intergenerational conversating and that willingness to learn from each other, So yeah, I'm with you on all of that, Brian, and you're right about opera. You're right. I mean, just the thought of music making and gathering and all that. We just did that this weekend with our opening night of Rigoletto here at Dallas Opera. I mean, we literally had full on gathered people. It was an opera. They came see the opera afterwards. There was a after party where we threw the doors open on the Winspear Opera House and had a band and people danced and ate and had a good time for the rest of the night. And that's what to me that's what it should be about. Coming together in community and after not being able to do that in that type of way for a few years now, it really puts into perspective how meaningful that is and why it is important that organizations like ours work together and talk to each other. We have more in common than we think, and again, we said this on the show before, why on earth it's American Indian Heritage Day in Texas on an opera on an opera platform? And it's like, because it's people. We're people. We're humans. And so I appreciate everything that you all do and the education and the heavy lifting that you all do. And my hope, and I know Quo's hope as well, is that you don't have to do it all on your own, that we do it all in community. Because it's you can't do it by yourself. You have to move in community. Humans were meant to move in community. So, Quo, other thoughts, positive notes?
Other thoughts or positive notes. I mean, Brian just gave us such such food for thought, especially as we look at what it means for our organizations to gather people, what it means for us as people to connect and to be mindful, not just of what we are doing now, but what has come before us, and how to do so in truth. I encourage everybody to sit with the truth. That's okay. The things that are not yours to carry, do not carry them. But the things that are yours to carry, do so, and do so in a community. Do so by centering truth, by centering connection, by working with others to create something together going forward. We can honor our heritage. We can honor the traditions. We can honor the things that are happening now. We can honor people's intent. But when we look and we find greater awareness in what is happening, that is when we start to take action. That is when we start to be accountable for the things we now know and for the things we want to create going forward. So as we gather people, because organizations, I love that, Brian, like we're gathering people. We want to be mindful and responsible and accountable for the reasons we are gathering people, the things we are asking people to trust us with when we gather them. I trust you you want me to trust you to come into this organization, to sit, to hear these stories and all these things, and the meaningful path forward. Opera, as we say all the time, is a very big art form. We had that conversation with Latina women in opera. It's a big art form, and it can fit more stories. It can fit more songs. It can fit more people. So we want to make sure that as we do this work together, we are mindful and we are committed in meaningful ways to make sure that we are honoring people's stories, honoring people's past, and being mindful of what we're doing and creating going forward together. So those are my positive notes.
And I think that this shouldn't be a BIPOC movement. It should be a humanitarian movement.
Talk about it, Brian.
Because
The heavy lifting. You got to have everybody doing the heavy lifting.
Yeah, because Europeans aren't white. You know, white isn't an ethnicity. It's just a classification. And the other part is the Europeans, that what y'all do with opera, there's so many layers, countries of Europeans with all the history that people forgot or try to erase. Because there's a melting pot theory that came across over here. And even in the old days when everybody came from New York, you know, for immigration on the boats, that the old pictures of great regalia, but they changed their names, sliced their names up, burned their regalia, changed their house, accents are gone. But how do you reclaim all that? And like I said, it's not just a BIPOC movement. It should be a humanitarian movement of gathering everybody's. And I think, you know, that we should start including the Europeans also, because so much rich history, they just maybe don't have the platform. But I think that that's where things need to be shared. But, you know, I think it has to go beyond the shared wealth of the operatic experience to get people to learn also that, oh, I'm also Celtic, or I'm also Italian on this part, north or south. You know, you learn about different. I'm indigenous, but they're from Russia or from Norway. Yeah. And I think those are the parts where we're just as curious as everybody else is, but that's where the dominance of what perception of privilege is, that sometimes we don't need the help. Maybe that we need to extend the help out to other people for them to learn who their grandparents are.
Beautiful.
Yeah, you encourage people to look more deeply, but below the surface and below what you've been taught. You know, you got to question the narrative you've been fed. So, absolutely, y'all, it's always a pleasure to have you with us. Elder Peggy, I thank you for your knowledge and your wisdom. It is wonderful to share space with you, of course. And Brian, as always, it is always fantastic to share space with you. And of course, Quo, you know, you're my friend, you know, like you're my little sister, you know, always. But I always like when all of us get together, because we have a ton to say. We have a room full of talkers here. But I think it's vitally important that this kind of conversation continues on. And like Brian says, everybody else has to jump in the mix with us. It can't just be the Black and brown folks doing it, talking about it. You know, it's vitally important that we know who we are. And the way to do that is to really look at your history and where you come from. And again, not just what you've been fed. we're gonna wrap, but thank you all so much for being here. Thank you all for watching as usual. We appreciate you sticking with us and learning more and more as we begin to work in community and continue to work in community across different communities
Right.
coming together. So it is wonderful to be in front of you all again. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.